The following is an Operation Podcast production. 21% of Americans reported that stress increases tension in their bodies, so this physical manifestation. 20% say that stress caused them to snap out of anger, just kind of reach your boiling point. And another 20% reported that stress caused unexpected mood swings.
Every 6 months, we survey about 1.5 million people through email. And stress and anxiety, number one, every time in terms of, what's your biggest problem in life? So, of course, what happens in your body at that juncture? Hypothalamus triggers your pituitary, triggers your adrenals. You release a steroid hormone called cortisol. Cortisol does what it's supposed to do in the body. Makes your heart rate increase, makes your breath rate increase. It releases glucose from your liver, which then goes to your extremities so you can fight or fly.
But we need it, I'm hearing.
We should not villainize cortisol.
All stress, should you choose it to be, can in fact be good for you.
The reality is, whether it's getting into an ice bath or jumping into the ice bath of a stressful conversation, this shouldn't be stressful, but it is. But guess what? The good news, the gospel, it gets easier. Doing hard things makes doing other hard things easier. Hey, my name is Jeff Krasno. I am the creator of Good Stress, which you can find on Commune, and I'm here on Ever Forward Radio.
Well, Jeff, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for coming by Ever Forward Radio. Welcome, man.
Yeah, Chase, what a treat, man. I know we've been talking about this, and here I am. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm so stressed out, but in a good way, which is
good stress.
Exactly what we're going to talk about. But in preparing for this and preparing for hearing more about your work and focus around the good aspects of stress, good stress, eustress, I was just really looking at some surprising stats around the state of our stressed out state in America. 49% stress is negatively affecting their behavior. 21% of Americans reported that stress increases tension in their bodies, so this physical manifestation. 20% say that stress caused them to snap out of anger, just kind of reach your boiling point. And another 20% reported that stress caused unexpected mood swings.
Oh, huge. And I'm certainly not immune to that either. In fact, we survey at Commune every 6 months, we survey about 1.5 million people through email.
Whoa.
Through our email list. And
it's a hell of a sample size.
It's a pretty good sample size. So we get back a lot of data. I mean, even if just like 1% answer the survey. And stress and anxiety, number one, every time in terms of, what's your biggest problem in life? So stress is rampant in our society. What we normally associate with stress in modern culture is distress, right? It's chronic stress. And stress is actually an adaptive response in the body. So something happens, that you perceive as a threat, and I think, your audience is probably very familiar with that endocrine cascade that happens in relation with threat perception, right? So something
fight, flight, freeze.
Exactly. Something in your perception is either inducing some sort of fear, or maybe there's an insult or neglect or something that happens on the internet generally, or 24-hour news, or incessant, sensationalism, hyperbole, that's designed to trigger your human negativity bias on social media, for example. Something like that happens. And, you have a normal stress response, an adaptive stress response, right? Same thing like if I was actually hiking in my neighborhood 3 days ago, and I ran into a coyote, right? So, and I was on a trail, and it was like between me and where I had to go. So, of course, what happens in your body at that juncture? Very normal adaptive response. Your hypothalamus triggers your pituitary, triggers your adrenals. You release a steroid hormone called cortisol. I'm sure many people are very familiar with cortisol. Cortisol does what it's supposed to do in the body. It makes your heart rate increase, makes your breath rate increase. It releases glucose from your liver, which then goes to your extremities so you can fight or fly.
All good things. In this scenario, cortisol gets such a bad rap. I think people hear cortisol and it gets them stressed out unnecessarily, but we need it, I'm hearing.
We should not villainize cortisol. In fact, there's natural cortisol waves that are adaptive in your life. It goes up in the morning because Sleepy Chase needs to get out of bed and be alert and do things, with his life. And then it goes down, and there's a little peak in the afternoon because he needs to do some more things. And then there's a natural trough in the evening as melatonin rises. That's a good balance, endocrine balance. But the other things that happen, with a stress response is, your pupils might dilate. The aperture of your experience gets really tight. And again, that is adaptive because it serves a biological imperative because you feel like you're under threat, right? What else happens? You become very self-obsessed and self-focused. You see the world as a threat, and your sense of trust with the outside world begins to erode because you need to take care of, number one, of your own individual.
Right here, right now, I'm not safe.
Now.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's cool. That's actually an adaptive response to stress. But what if the coyote never goes away, right? I'm sort of metaphor in that particular case. But what if your stress is incessant? It's just endless. And you have this overactive stress response and no tools to emotionally regulate back from this sympathetic overload or amygdala hijack back into a ventral dorsal state or a parasympathetic state. What happens then? Well, then cortisol is always active. And in a perpetually cortisol infused state, what happens? Well, your blood glucose goes out of balance, right? Because your liver is always secreting glucose into the bloodstream. Insulin then goes up. You become insulin resistant, pre-diabetes, diabetes, it goes on and on and on from there. What else happens? Your immune system begins to falter because high cortisol will undermine the production of certain innate immune cells like neutrophils and macrophages, monocytes, et cetera, that are incredibly important for protecting you against bacteria and viruses and other pathogens. What else happens? Well, chronic cortisol will erode the good bacteria in your gut and cause dysbiosis or eventually maybe leaky gut, intestinal permeability, which will lead to constant inflammation, an over-agitated immune response. So you have low immune function and then bolstered immune function.
The pros just keep coming.
Yeah. So this is what's going on. And, in modern society, it's perpetual IV drip of chronic stress. And this is incredibly detrimental, obviously, both to our physiology and our psychology.
In your opinion, blanket statement here, how much of the current stress, we'll just say in America, is self-inflicted versus reality? How much of it is just us perpetuating worst case scenario, being stuck in our head, possibly even catastrophizing actual stress, but just making it a mountain out of a molehill, so to speak? What's the kind of ratio do you think people are dealing with in terms of perceived stress and actual stress?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I really have a clinically evidence-based answer for that. But I would say I'll just say to you now, it's 50-50 because certainly there is a very, very toxic environment in which we live, right? So Gabor Mate uses this great metaphor in his book. You put a bacterial cell in a petri dish, right? And you fill it with nitrogen and carbon and all sorts of good stuff. The normal expectation is that cell is going to proliferate and be healthy. You put that same cell in bleach or alcohol, and what's the expectation? That expectation is going to become dysfunctional and die. So the name of that biological medium is called a culture, if you remember from biology class. So we also live in a culture. You put us in a healthy culture and you fill it with love and nutrient-rich whole foods and all sorts of good stuff. The normal expectation is that we're going to thrive as individuals. You put it in a caustic, toxic culture, and what's the expectation? And so, stressed out, sick human beings are really just the normal and expected result of living in a toxic culture, period. So there's a lot out there working against us. At the same time, there are tools that are available to us that are geared towards emotional regulation. And in fact, the body is engineered to always bounce back. We're actually engineered for homeostasis, balance, equilibrium. It's sensitive and tenuous. So, we get knocked down, we come back up. And so we need to cultivate that same, the body, for example, the liver. It's fucking amazing. So the liver titrates just right to balance the right amount of glucose in the bloodstream, provided you haven't screwed it up, or the acid alkaline balance. It's like right around 7.35, a little bit alkaline. You can do a lot and the body will always kind of maintain that homeostasis. Thermoregulation, right? So you get in an ice bath, what does the body do? Raises your body temperature.
That's why we shiver. Yeah. Trying to heat you back up.
So we're engineered for the Goldilocks zone. And in fact, health is the Goldilocks zone. And that's true in all of its expressions. You look at what does a healthy economy look like? It looks like a bell curve, right?
Not this one right now.
Well, no, because this one has 3 dudes that own more wealth than the bottom 50% combined.
Jeez.
So it's a flat world with spikes at the end. But a healthy economy would look like a bell curve. It would look like a distribution of wealth and a thriving middle class, right? What would health look like in ecology? It would look like biodiversity, right? What would it look like in politics? Well, it certainly wouldn't look like what we have today, which is just like extremes. It would look like compromise and middle ground and, finding commonality, et cetera. Healthy systems tend to cluster towards the middle. And that is also true with the body. The body clusters always towards the middle. You've got excitatory neurotransmitters and inhibitory neurotransmitters like glutamate and GABA, right? So when you're psychologically balanced, those are in some sort of equilibrium, right? You have insulin and glucagon, you have cortisol and melatonin, et cetera. You have all these contraposing molecules, and your job is to sort of foster a really nice homeostasis between them, a nice balance. So to get back to your question, it is really incumbent on us to find the tools to emotionally regulate such that when we are triggered, when something out there hijacks our amygdala and we have that adaptive response, that then we can then pull ourselves back. We can find that space between stimulus and response, and in that lies our liberation, right?
For me, when it comes to stress, the more that I have learned about stress, how it shows up in my life, what it looks like, what it feels like, and that could be stressors, just the concept of stress, actual, working on, the inside, working on cortisol management. It's kind of, for me, boiled down to, there's nothing I can do to really eliminate stress or stressors in my life. If I choose to get out of bed, then I am 99% of the time going to be welcoming similar new stressors into my life. It is only the level of awareness which I can catch myself when I'm getting stressed out so that I can better manage it. Do you think the trouble with stress right now with most people is the disconnect there, the lack of awareness around stress is inevitable versus, this is stress, I can manage it?
I think so. I mean, certainly there's things that you can do to mitigate outside stressors in your life. You don't have to be on Twitter or X, right? But I think that you're right. It is a mindset question. And so I'll use an example. So I talk about fasting a lot. Fasting was really important for me in my own health journey. And maybe we can unpack that later. But I was very, very overweight, and I was diabetic and all these kinds of things. And so I started to adopt all these protocols. And fasting was one of them. So I adopted it was 3 or 4 years ago, a 16-8 protocol. And I'm sure your listeners are very
16 hours no eating, 8 hours eating window.
Exactly. So consolidating all my consumption of food in an 8-hour window. I was a little bit fundamentalist about it at the beginning, but I've since stopped being neurotic about it. I'm just kind of like to have fun. We will probably eat tonight together outside of my window. So
we will. We're making concessions, everybody. Yeah.
But when I first started, I was pretty stringent. And fasting in many ways is a spiritual pursuit. It's obviously has a lot of physiological benefits, but in a way, the biggest thing for me was spiritual, or psychological, you might categorize it at. So because I became sort of a disciple to this practice, and I consolidated all my consumption of food into 8 hours, that didn't mean I didn't get hungry, at 9 p.m. at night, right? But that was outside of my window. Yeah. So what could I do? Well, I knew I wasn't going to eat, but that didn't stop me from having the stimulus. So what I had to do was actually examine the nature of that stimulus itself, examine and witness the nature of the hunger, and then ask myself the question, is this hunger a biological need, or is it an emotional or psychological desire?
Or am I just stuck in a habit loop and I don't even realize it? I just, always in this place or this time, grab this snack, do this thing, and it's just mindless.
Of course, because when I wasn't a disciple to the practice, what would I do? I would just mindlessly, unconsciously meander over to the tray of snacks over here and pick up the Cheetos or whatever and indulge, right? But because I couldn't do that, I was forced to find that space between stimulus and response to actually witness the provenance, the nature of the stimulus itself. And then take a break and then decide, is this because I'm bored or someone insulted me on Instagram or for some other, am I eating my feelings? Because 99% of the time it wasn't really a biological need. And so I use that example because really fasting for me, it was certainly effective as it pertained to food. But really where it was most effective is where I started to apply that principle to other parts of my life, to finding that space between stimulus and response as it pertained to drinking alcohol, for example. Is this really a biological need or is this really a psychological or emotional desire? What am I going to do right now? Certainly with my children, I have 3 teenage daughters. There's plenty of opportunity to be really fucking frustrated with them. There's lots of stimulus, let's just say.
Well, in public, they're on great behavior. I met them, I think, twice now. So
yes.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I always say the world gets the best of them in every way. They would do something that would be aggravating or annoying, right, to me. And then instead of just snapping and being completely reactive, find that space. Say, well, what is the origin of their behavior? Why are they acting this way? And what is the appropriate response to this behavior? And this is the key to everything in life, Chase, is finding that space. Viktor Frankl wasn't a dummy. You know? And that is true. And that mindset sits behind almost everything, every choice, every behavior, that we engage in. In fact, as I began to think about like the protocols that I was adopting in my life to, reverse all of the chronic fatigue and brain fog and dad bod and man boobs and all this other shit that I had a few years ago, it was mindset behind all of those things, that was key.
Well, you're in the right space for that. That's what Living a Life Ever Forward is all about, the whole point and theme of the show. And I think this is a great opportunity to kind of shift into the core of your new work around good stress, positive stress, eustress. If you choose it to be all stress, and this is going to be a hard one for some people to grab a hold of or to practice, all stress, should you choose it to be, can in fact be good for you. And it's just, to your point, our mindset around it.
Yeah. So I completely agree. And it's certainly easier in some places in our lives than in other places in our lives. Candidly, I think the stress or the eustress or the relationship that I had with stress that was most interesting in some ways had to do with personal relationships.
How so?
Okay. So in March 2020, I started to write an essay for Commune to send out every Sunday. And my business partner was like, you should really write something, give people little buoys of hope and stories that they can relate to. And, if we share...
This too shall pass.
Yeah. It's like if we share our emotions, they're easier to process, et cetera. So I did. Quickly found myself over a literary barrel because I had to produce like 2,000 words every Sunday. But fortunately, or somewhat unfortunately for the world, but fortunately for a writer, 2020 provided plenty to write about. And I was really taking on a lot of, incendiary issues. Obviously, how could you not? So there was COVID, and then there was the, reckoning for social justice in the wake of the George Floyd murder, and then there was like QAnon and all of the crazy vicissitudes of Trumplandia and the election and everything like that. So there's plenty to write about. And I was really trying to write kind of very like thoughtful, kind of quote unquote middle way articles that took in a lot of different viewpoints, et cetera. But over the course of 2,000 words, I was bound to offend someone, right?
Of course.
And especially during that time, because people were very triggered, right? Or ready to be triggered. And I made the dubious choice of attaching my personal email to the bottom of every one of these essays. The list at that point was like 1.2 million. It's now grown. So,
well, I have to just bring up, everyone listening is going to be like, Jeff, how do I grow my email list to over 1 million? That's insane. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's another. It's another.
That'll
podcast.
be part 2.
Happy
I guess.
to talk about it. But actually, Oprah taught me. But that's a whole other thing.
Oh yeah. You're just gonna drop Oprah in the middle of the podcast. All right.
I'm gonna drop it. All right. Just so we can continue it next. So you book me again. She didn't teach me personally, but her team. So I did that, and then I would wake up Monday morning with 500, 600 emails to that email box. And, most of them, candidly were encouraging and nice. But I'd probably get 2 or 3 dozen every Monday that would sort of crest the bow of my inbox with expletives, I don't 50,000 times in an email, But some of them were actually thoughtful in their own way, and I disagreed with them, but whatever. And they came from all sides of the political spectrum. I mean, certainly there was a lot of people on the right that didn't like something I had to say. And then there were people kind of on the far left and kind of in the abolish the police crowd that didn't really like what I have to say, or didn't think like a white man should be centering himself during this time. But of course, I was just writing my essay every Sunday. Anyhow, regardless of that, I vowed to engage with those people. And initially, it was very, I took it very personally, and I was very defensive, honestly. I was like, wait, I'm just trying to write a free essay here, to examine thoughtfully these issues that we're grappling with as a society, and why are you tearing me up?
And that's my favorite part about putting out free content is that the lengths to which people will go to just pull you down, and the time that they take out of their life to berate a free piece of content.
Totally. But I started to actually get a little bit more insight into the nature of that behavior. So I would engage in a few emails back and forth, and the more thoughtful, respectful people would write me kind of long responses and stuff. So eventually I said, okay, let's get on a Zoom call. And at that juncture, that's my great David Copperfield routine, because most people disappeared at that juncture.
I was going to say, did they actually take you up on it?
26 people did.
Wow, that's actually impressive.
So I did 26 1-hour Zoom calls with people that disagreed with me or didn't like me in one fashion or another.
How did it go? What did you do?
Okay.
What was the outcome?
So interesting. So I really did have to get myself into a place of safety and security. Like the Stoics call this euthymia, sort of a state of unflappability, where you're sort of inure yourself to insult. And I'd taken so much insult that, I basically built what I call my psychological immune system.
And now, how did you actually drop in to prepare yourself for that?
Yeah. So Well, your audience is very intelligent as it pertains to human physiology. So we build our physiological immune system through exposure, low-grade exposure to pathogens, right? So bacteria and viruses, et cetera. The same really could be said for your psychological immune system, that through low-grade exposure to some insult and criticism, you build up immunity to those things. And by the time September came around, when I had these calls, I'd really built up my psychological immune system.
You got some tough skin, thick skin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just realized that other people's criticism and ad hominem was really just their own anger. And they were just trying to displace that anger onto me. So I could pick up that ember and hold it and plot and brood over how I was going to throw it back. But who would be getting burned at that point?
Oh, damn.
Yeah. So I stopped. I dropped it. And I started to try to, again, examine and witness the nature of the stimulus. Like, where is this coming from? Where is this behavior coming from? And so it was with that mindset that I entered these conversations. And my goal really was to create a safe and secure environment to have these kinds of conversations, such that when we did have the conversation, we weren't, our amygdala weren't hijacked, that we could actually be in a place where we could leverage our neo-mammalian rationality and really try to connect. So I got on these calls. But at this juncture, I'll say, Chase, I didn't have any training in nonviolent communication or anything like that, or empathic conversation or communication.
I'm sure you became a quick learner.
Yeah. Well, I was going by instinct for sure. Later, I met a number of people that were trained by Marshall Rosenberg, who started nonviolent communication. There's a whole approach to having these kinds of conversations, which I later learned and am writing about in this book. But at this juncture, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just going by instinct. But I was entering these conversations with the express intention of creating a safe and secure environment, because that's the only environment in which relationships can really truly form.
Any conflict resolution, of course.
Yeah, and you need to be available, and be seeking mutuality, et cetera. So I'd get on these calls. There'd be 2 minutes of superficial pleasantries, thank you for doing this, and
hey, how are you? Great. So I'm here to tell you why I hate you so much. But the weather, wow.
Yeah, but that's not how it went, actually. So I got on, and very much unlike this conversation, I didn't say anything. I was just like, hey, welcome. I really want to understand how you feel, and and please, just tell me. And I'm here to listen. That was how I started. And I generally didn't say anything for 45 minutes. And Chase, they didn't say anything generally about the issue that had brought us initially to loggerheads. They just told me their life story.
Man.
And their pain and their anguish and their divorce and their kids and And I just sat there. It's crazy because I haven't thought about it in a while.
Wow, this is powerful, man. This is powerful.
So
I can just imagine some of these conversations.
I mean, these people were hurting. And what I realized is that, people just wanted to be heard. They just wanted to be seen. And that was my role here, was to provide a safe container and environment for them to be seen and heard. So that happened. They would go on for 45 minutes or so. And as I got better at doing this, I started to take notes and noting places of convergence in my life with them, with their lives. So I've got daughters. They have daughters. Okay, cool. Wrote that down. They were born in Chicago. I was born in Chicago. Okay, write that I was like, oh, they drove cross country. I drove cross country. Oh, their car broke down in Texas. My car broke down in Oklahoma, whatever. I started to write down these places of commonality. And by the time they kind of had exhausted themselves, I would say, oh, that's so funny, man. I have 3 daughters too, man. We're in the 3 daughters club.
You just reflected back the same story, but it's yours.
And then they were like, oh my God. And what I realized is that the key to these stressful conversations is not seeking agreement or solution. The key was seeking connection. And, what came out of this is like, I had like 24 what I call frenemies. They're in like their own little address part of my address book, contacts or whatever, as my frenemies. And I still text with probably 10 of them.
No way.
And they're all over the place. Some are like hardcore Trumpers, and they razz me. And I mean, they razz me. They send me like, check me out, this week in the Movie, like, you and your progressive liberal walkers or whatever.
Did you get any storming the Capitol photos?
No, I didn't get any storming the Capitol. And then I get stuff totally from the other side as well, and it's just become sort of we have a very funny repartee that I have with a lot of these people. And candidly, it gave me an insight into parts of the culture that I just never understood. Particularly, the kind of rural white working class. And I had a that's probably the biggest proportion of people that I began to communicate with were, folks that were living in what we call sometimes the flyover states, that were, that main streets had been boarded down and they, were working 2 part-time jobs at minimum wage and shopping at 7-Eleven. Those were the people that I really connected with and started to, really have a lot of empathy for. And, at the end of the day, this kind of leaning in to stressful conversations, there may be nothing more important than that, because if we can lean into a conversation that is difficult and thorny, with someone we don't even know, well, maybe then we can build up the courage and the bravery to have the conversations that we need to have with the people that we actually love. But we tend to avoid those.
Ain't that the truth?
Like my parents, they're in their 80s. I got to have those conversations, my daughters, like my wife, my friends, and I've become, much less worried about having those conversations. I don't avoid them anymore.
One key word I heard in your story there, first of all, again, that's incredibly commendable. And what a really cool thing to have literally in your back pocket, in your phone or email list of these people that at any moment are down for a challenge. Yeah. And it sounds like you're in a good, healthy debate kind of relationship. And what a great ego check, what a great life check, what a great yin to the yang, or yang to the yin here, I guess, in this case. I think that's just really commendable, and I would challenge everybody listening to just lean into that. How much more convenient and comfortable it is for us to surround ourselves with like-minded people, with comfortable people, with people that don't challenge us. Yeah. Now, of course, that's great. Like-mindedness is amazing, and I wouldn't be here today, and you wouldn't be here today, I'm sure, if it were not for such practices.
Yeah, we connected over shared values. And
things. But how many of us can go, you know what? 2 of the 10 people I surround myself with the most, I keep because they challenge me. Here's an example.
Adversity.
It
shows up.
I'm in a studio and like the world still goes on. Best intentions still, the world goes on. But here's an example. One thing that works for me in a situation like this, when stress, literally distraction, uncomfortability comes knocking or banging on the side door, is, remembering that it's not about me. That's just somebody trying to do their job. Yeah. That's just somebody doing their job, and then without them doing their job right now, banging and clanging trash cans while I'm trying to talk, we would have trash running through the alleyways. We wouldn't have, systems and things that I take for granted, all of us take for granted. That's just somebody doing their job. And when I think about that, it really pretty immediately makes me go, all right.
Well, you just found the mindset right there. You could have been like, oh man, we got to stop the recording. But you said, wait a minute. This is actually an opportunity that just presented itself to model how you deal with adversity. And the reality is, whether it's getting into an ice bath or jumping into the ice bath of a stressful conversation, doing hard things makes doing other hard things easier. Just simply. And so we need to get comfortable with discomfort, because it's actually comfort and convenience and chronic ease that actually leads to chronic dis-ease. We've engineered our lives to be so comfortable. Surfeit of endless highly processed calories, right? Or a little digital thermostat on the wall that keeps us at a snuggly little 72 so Chase and I can be comfortable during the podcast or whatever. Like 24/7 access to Larry David. Like, I want to see, Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Don't ask me to give up my Larry David, all right? I keep LD on demand.
As you should. But, I guess what I'm saying is that, our lives that have been engineered for tremendous convenience over the last, 50, but certainly 150 years, or I should say 150, but certainly in the last 50 years, that convenience leads to very inconvenient realities. I always kind of laugh at the notion of the convenience store, the 7-Eleven, how detrimental the food is in a convenience store. In the end, it's not convenient at all to go to the doctor or to be on insulin for the rest of your life, or a statin for the rest of your life, or rely on Ozempic or Wegovy to be able to maintain a healthy weight.
Or to rely on people in our life to give us these aspects that we can't figure out how to give ourselves. There's also such a thing as relying on things that are, most people would looking in, oh, this is good. I need my partner. I need my job. I need this thing. I need these relationships.
Yeah.
You need yourself first and foremost, which I want to kind of go back to in your story with all those people you were connecting to, the haters, for lack of a better term. I heard connection. And I think once we're able to realize and develop, create, reconnect a connection to our stressors, we then begin to kind of dissipate them. We develop a healthier relationship, and this is the path to eustress, right? But I think most people struggle more often than not connecting to themselves, and therefore staying in a state of chronic, unnecessary stress. And I can personally say that the more I have spent or created habits in the work, mental health, emotional health, all of my personal wellness practices have gotten me closer and closer and closer to Chase and connected to myself, and being able to recognize when I'm disconnected from myself so that I can drop back in. And not all the time, but most of the time, my woes become way less woesome. My stressors become way less stressful. And I figure things out more quickly than just staying stuck and disconnected to myself, and therefore in stress and not on the path to eustress. What would you recommend somebody to do right here, right now, to develop that connection to themselves first and foremost, so that they're more on the path to eustress?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things. And I think, what you're pointing to, we all struggle with to one degree or another. Many of us are seeking, external agents, be them products or shopping or Instagram likes or followers or drugs or alcohol or chocolate cake or, new shoes or whatever. Larry David, to assuage our own perceived deficiencies and discontents, right? So we're looking to external agents for that. But those provide ephemeral, if any, comfort really. In that project. And really, you have to look internally. It's about interoception.
How does one do that?
Yeah.
How does one actually look internally?
Yeah. Well, I think the first step is, just being aware of it. So having some awareness that, chasing something outside of myself is not going to really, it's going to keep me on this hedonic treadmill. There are practices specifically for this. There's a lot of Stoic practices, actually. Sometimes they're like negative visualizations where, you think about something that you really, really cherish that you have. Maybe it's like, a watch that your dad gave you, a family heirloom, or a relationship that you have in your life that you really, really care about. And then you imagine losing that thing.
Smashing it to pieces.
Yeah. And you sit in that feeling of that loss and that pain and that regret. And then you come back to this unbelievable sunny realization that thing still is in your life. And the net effect of that is loving the things that you already have. And that, can elicit a tremendous amount of gratitude. So there's a lot of practices that way.
So you're talking about maybe the practice of detachment? Could boil it down to that? Yeah,
or that very practice of focusing on loving the things that you already have. Or focusing or thinking about that the thing that you're doing might be the very, very last time that you're doing it. Oof. And that can be as prosaic as making a cup of coffee. If Chase was going to make I don't know if you drink coffee, but let's say you were going to make, after this podcast, your last cup of coffee ever in your life. I bet you'd make a very, very good cup of coffee.
It would be Strong Coffee again. Shout out Strong Coffee Company.
There you go.
Straight up,
and so, obviously, we kind of skate through life. My dad calls, do I pick up the phone? I'm busy. But then when I'm really focusing on that, well, what if this is the last time you would ever call? Of course, man. I'd pick up that call and I'd talk to him for hours. And so I think, it is leaning into the things that we already have. And that can really elicit a tremendous amount of contentment and happiness. But I will just say there's so many other ways, I think, to lean into stress and honestly have a very positive relationship.
Like
with
what?
stress.
If you could give us your personal top two. I know you're deep in a lot of research and have an upcoming book around all of this, so I'm sure you have a couple top of mind.
Yeah. So I would say I'll start with resistance training, just because it was such an anathema to me. I was never the gym guy, and now I've come out of the closet as a little
come on in, the water's fine.
Thanks,
actually,
man.
It might be cold. It's probably a cold plunge water.
Probably cold plunge. But I find it to be really interesting. About 8 months ago, I was hurting my back all the time. My knee, this was so recently, I would get popping and crackling in my knees. I've been an athlete all my life, and just kind of an avid tennis player, but I was really just getting injured all the time. And then my buddy Light Watkins, I don't know if you know.
Light. He's been on the show.
He was like, Kraz, you got to get into squats, man. And I was like, oh yeah, well, of course, because part of my MO is actually examining how my hunter-gatherer ancestors lived, because we evolved over hundreds of thousands of years living relatively in the same way, and living a little bit more that way. And of course, our hunter-gatherer ancestors were big squatters. They didn't have comfy couches or comfy chairs. And so I started squatting all the time. I couldn't even get into a squatted position, first of all.
You want to squat right now?
I could squat if you want.
You want to drop it down? Let's do it. Let's go. We'll make it interactive. This is shout out Darshan Shaw. We're taking a micro. What does he call it?
Snack. Exercise snack.
Exercise snack. Yeah, we'll take exercise snack. So and this is why I wear ABC pants. These are Lulu stretchy pants.
Oh yeah, I got some jeans. So just to sit here.
Oh yeah.
You can get lower.
Who's got the depth, Joseph? Let's go.
No, you're going to be better than me.
No, he's got it.
So I started to just to sit in. I started to sit in a squat more often.
That felt good, honestly. It felt
yeah, it was
a little stretch.
Nice.
Yeah,
and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I played some wicked tennis this morning anyway, so I was like, ooh. And then I started to get a little bit more involved with it, and started to do a lot more squats on a Bosu ball, for example. And I used to do squats with weights on a Bosu ball, and I really liked that because it your mind cannot wander.
That's a challenge. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it brings your breath very central, and your focus and your attention very central, very centered. So that was great. And, I noticed just in my own, musculature and my physiology, boy, after doing that often for 6 to 8 months, boy, that really, really changed. But where this kind of like became really interesting to me is training my quads actually ended up training my mind.
How?
So at first it was really hard, right? I couldn't squat. I couldn't get my heels even close to the ground. I had to put like a piece of wood and use it as a wedge. And then I got better, and I got better, and I got better, and I got stronger. And then eventually, when I would go on the tennis court, I was like, boy, man, my core and my center is really, really strong. And then I started like not losing, because come 2.5 hours in the third set, I was still there. Like I was just, and not only that, I became then so confident, because I was like, yeah, you're going to play great and you might beat me if you get lucky, but come 2 hours from now, I'm going to be stronger than you. So we'll see what happens.
What a great literal stress adaptation.
I know.
Yeah.
So that kind of confidence started to sort of permeate my psychology. And then what happened, I started to like find this incredible ease. Because I was so confident, I could balance this kind of like parasympathetic clarity on the tennis court with obviously a very sympathetic like fight or flight body, and find that unbelievable balance between, and that's really flow state, where you basically just become, completely aware of your body in space and time. And it used to be very difficult for me to find that place, and now I really can find it more often. Resistance training also, I was beyond metabolically dysfunctional. I had, I wear a continuous glucose monitor. I put that on maybe 3 or 4 years ago. At that juncture, I had, fasting glucose levels of 125 milligrams per deciliter. So kind of the highest end of prediabetes, lowest end of diabetes. That sent me finally to my PCP, which we were talking about before we started recording.
Hell of a journey.
Yeah, it's like blew that appointment off quite a lot. But finally went in there, finally went in to see my PCP and had a hemoglobin A1C of 6.7%. So again, that was kind of higher end of prediabetes, lower end of diabetes. And so I this was very central for me adopting all of these protocols. But the kind of where I really saw the balancing in my blood sugar was after doing more resistance training, because essentially muscle is a metabolic organ, really.
It's the machine,
just a glucose sink. And, contracted muscle does not even require insulin to uptake glucose out of the bloodstream. And, that's where I saw my fasting glucose levels went from 125 to about 80.
Wow.
Over the course of about 4 or 5 months.
That's incredible.
Obviously that was stacked with other protocols. But man, getting into building muscle, particularly at 53, was a game changer for me. And I'm certainly not Lou Ferrigno or anything, but
me either, for sure. There's this concept I love. I forget where I heard it. It's not a Chase original by any means, but knowing without doing is the same thing as not knowing. Now, right now we can pick up our smartphones, we can listen to podcasts, watch podcasts, go to seminars, we can read, we can research, we can learn all these amazing things about how to become more aware of stress, to mitigate stress, and to turn everything as much as possible into positive stress through mindset and our own lifestyle adaptation. From knowing to doing, where are people slipping up? Why are they not doing? Why are they not adherent? What is going on there?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with habits, right? You have to unwind maladaptive habits and wind up habits, good habits, adaptive ones. And I think a lot of it is because, the way that the information is presented seems inaccessible. So I might say like not to you, but to someone like, hey dude, ice baths, like unbelievable activation of dopamine for 48 hours, incredible for mood, unbelievable for metabolic health, incredible for building psychological resilience. I could like go down the list. Nobody is going to jump into a 34-degree ice bath if they've never done it before. And that's the way a lot of this is presented. So what I try to say to people is take a shower, and at the end of the shower, just slowly turn it down a little bit colder till it's a little bit uncomfortable, and then get out.
We're microdosing here. We're microdosing adversity.
The dose makes the poison, right? We don't want hyperthermia or hypothermia. We want to slowly be able to, increase duration, and in this case, lower temperature. And that goes for everything. Like I wear these like minimal shoes.
Oh yeah, Vivo?
These are Vivo
great. I just met up with Galahad last week, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He was at my house for the weekend.
Yeah.
And but he would, and we did this talk together. And someone said like, yeah, I bought some Vivos, and then I went running for 10. I started running 10 miles a day, and like my feet hurt. And he's like, no, you don't want to do that. And I said, that's the equivalent of jumping into a 34-degree ice bath if you've never done one before.
Or someone who has never exercised trying to deadlift, 405.
100%.
Yeah.
It's like the dose makes the poison, right? And so we want to present these things as accessible, and they are. They're getting cold is free. Like not eating saves you money. This is not like ozone therapy or hyperbaric chambers or cryo.
Yeah.
Or
there are levels to this, of course.
Yeah,
within reason, within means, within budget, within access.
Yeah, most of these things you can honestly just do. It's just about what you're saying is merging, intention and action.
All right, let me ask you directly then. If you could give us, what is one absolutely free, of course someone's going to chime in and make an excuse about something, but one of the freest, best things we could do to introduce Eustress into our life, all the way up to, if you have the means, it's going to cost you money to, how are you going to invest, where are you going to invest to really go that route of Eustress? Mm-hmm. Or maybe is there one or two that you have?
Yeah. So I would say you wouldn't think that it would be difficult or stressful to sit on your ass and do nothing.
Whoa. I love that you said that.
But it is. In today's world, everybody and every company and everything is vying for two things: your time and your attention, right? And we simply were not evolved for this kind of information overload. So we need to take back our time and attention. And you do that through a practice. And that practice initially is very stressful. To sit here and do nothing for even 60 seconds and just witness phenomena arising and subsiding in consciousness moment to moment, or witness our breath, just sit there and notice. Just sit there and notice. Do it right now. And, this shouldn't be stressful, but it is. But guess what? The good news, the gospel, it gets easier. Doing hard things makes doing other hard things easier. And the benefits are just inestimable, in your life. Again, it goes back to that mindset. If you're able to witness the garbage truck come and go, see, it's gone now, right? The garbage truck isn't really that different.
I forgot about it until just now again. Yeah.
It's not really different than an emotion or a feeling. They come and they go, right? So you just don't attach to it, don't identify with it. And the more you engage in this practice, the more it begins to punctuate, your life everywhere. So that would be one.
Yeah. What about if we want to drop some dollar bills? Let's say I got a budget of $100 to $500. What is something that I can invest in for a positive stressor in my life?
Yeah. So many of these things are free, like fasting, for example, and cold therapy and light therapy, getting out in the morning for 20 minutes and, staring into the sky, which will sort of set your circadian rhythm, et cetera. Heat therapy is not always free. So not everyone has a sauna, for example. But you can I just bought for $100 on Amazon, I admit, a sauna blanket.
Oh, I've seen these, yeah.
Yeah. And you snuggle in, you're like a little corn dog. You're like a hot dog in a bun.
It's Jeff in a blanket. Yeah, pig in a blanket.
It is exactly Jeff in a blanket. They give you 2 little like armholes if you do want to be on your phone if you want to. Sure.
Because we can't do nothing, right?
You can't do nothing. Yeah, if you could stack those protocols, be in the sauna blanket and meditate, do nothing. And so, you can get the same benefits there. I mean, so basically, exposure.
Yeah. Why is heat a eustress?
Yeah. Well, heat is it's gonna mimic in some ways, aerobic exercise because it's gonna raise your heart rate, and so it's gonna be like zone 1, zone 2 exercise in terms of imparting some of those cardiovascular benefits like aerobic exercise does. There is some detoxification associated with sweat, so you're going to sweat. Most of your detox happens with your liver and your kidneys and stuff like that, but you are going to get some heavy metals and some other things through sweating. But the bigger ones are seem to be the activation of certain proteins in the brain, so like BDNF, so brain-derived neurotropic
factor. Yeah.
Exactly. So,
which is a good thing.
Total good thing. I mean, until relatively recently, we essentially thought that the brain stopped growing at age 25, 26. Now, it is true that I see it with my daughter. Her brain's like popping off right now. She's in college, and she actually called me earlier today and read me this essay. I'm like, are you kidding? You are just brilliant. But now, with neuroplasticity, we're discovering that, of neurobiogenesis, essentially new neurons.
This is solidifying my your question earlier about if it was my last cup of coffee on earth. Strong Coffee Company actually it increases BDNF. It has nootropic factor, neurofactor in it already. Yeah, so I'm going out swinging. The last cup is serving me well. Yeah. All right.
Fortunately, it won't be your last cup. And then the other one, Rhonda Patrick talks a lot about this. She's kind of like the
Found My
queen.
Fitness.
Exactly. She went, I don't know the stat anymore, but, it's like equivalent to the number of like sheep there are in New Zealand in terms of the number of saunas there are in Finland. I think there are more sheep in New Zealand, but anyways. But so much of the data around sauna is from Finland, for good reason.
We have so much time. They've been doing it for so long.
Yeah. And it's cold. And, my mother-in-law is in town. I got to take her to the airport after this. She's Finnish. So she's always been big in sauna. My wife is like part Finnish. And hopefully they're not finished with me. Anyway, but I have to write that one down.
That would be a stressor.
That would be a stressor. But there's also, so Rhonda Patrick has rolled up a lot of this data into meta-analyses around sauna. So she's great to follow around this stuff. But there's also this other protein called heat shock proteins. So heat shock proteins actually maintain the shape of other proteins. So when proteins get generated in the body through the combination of amino acids and different recipes coming from our DNA, et cetera, they get made in the ribosomes of the cell, and they have a 3-dimensional shape, and they need to maintain that shape to be functional. And sometimes they'll misfold and then become dysfunctional. So these heat shock proteins seem to be very good at maintaining the 3-dimensional shape and by extension maintaining the functionality of these proteins. And so, there seems to be some mounting evidence that they are neuroprotective against like beta amyloid proteins or tau tangles, et cetera, which are often associated or correlated with Alzheimer's. There's a lot of different theories about Alzheimer's these days, but clearly these beta amyloid plaques and these tau tend to be highly associated with Alzheimer's, and these heat shock proteins that you get from the sauna seem to prevent the development of these kind of more deleterious.
Amazing. I'm here for it.
Yeah.
I'm here for it.
And to be honest, it's a very pleasant experience, much more pleasant than being in the cold. And then, I'm sure a lot of people, do the contrast bathing. And if you do that, kind of hot, cold, always finish cold, heat is a vasodilator, so it's going to open blood vessels up, and cold is a vasoconstrictor. It's going to close blood vessels down. And so when you go between the two of them, you're opening and closing and opening and closing, and that has really great benefits on the circulatory system because it's moving blood around, and the lymph because it's moving the lymph around. So,
amazing.
So these are some of just the more kind of empirical hacks, that you can do.
No, thank you so much for sharing. And I can't wait to learn more when you have your finished work out. Stress, I think, is a really unique thing. It's something that we all can relate to, and we all have a relationship to it, whether we realize it or not. So here's our moment of awareness to develop for the first time or come back to in a new way that relationship to stress.
Yeah.
If you could summarize, before I get into my last question, if you could summarize into one statement, one phrase, what would you want the listener, the viewer, to walk away with the most today in terms of the concept of stress, particularly eustress?
Yeah. So I believe that chronic dis-ease is the result of chronic ease. So we evolved with certain forms of Paleolithic stress over tens of thousands of years. Food scarcity, fluctuations in temperature. We lived outside and immersed ourselves in nature. We lived communally. We were responsible not only for our own well-being, but for the well-being of the tribe. So what I really encourage people to do is examine the conditions in which we evolved. What were those Paleolithic stressors that conferred benefits and resilience, and live a little bit more that way?
I can't talk. It's been a long podcast day, excuse me. Yeah. I can't disagree with you there. Absolutely. So to bring it all home, I think what you're talking about here is an incredible example of moving forward in life, living a life ever forward. But those two words, Jeff, when you hear them, what do they mean to you? If I were to ask you, how does Jeff Krasno live a life ever forward? What would you say?
Yeah, I think we're always in this place of evolution. 4 years ago, man, I was not in good shape. Like I said, I'm kind of the most boring guy you could have on your podcast, honestly, because my story.
No, trust me, you're not.
No. Because my story is not extraordinary at all. It's so ordinary. But the problem is we've normalized brain fog, chronic fatigue, adiposity, irritability, the inability to concentrate. I read 0 books in 2017. 0 books. So what I'm saying is change is possible. Moving forward, ever forward is possible. And I see it. I'm living proof of it. And the great news right now is that there is so much agency. It's like we are impermanent processes changing incessantly in relation to our environment, period. We are impermanent. Chase tomorrow is a different Chase than Chase today. Now, we're anchored to this sense of physical and psychological continuity that gives us an identity, but I'll see you tomorrow or I'll see you tonight, and billions upon billions of bacteria in your gut will have turned over. Billions of cells will have died and new ones will have been created. You will not be the same person. You will be literally reincarnated by the time I see you tonight. Change is incessant. And so when we recognize ourselves as process and not product, we have a choice. We can be moving towards wholeness, that's healing. Or we can be moving towards disease, that's ailing. And we have tremendous agency over which direction that we're going. And fortunately, man, I got lucky and I moved forward. And the other thing I would just say is I love learning. Remain curious. That is going to pull you forward. because I'll tell you, basically, I almost put myself autodidactically through a strange form of medical school over the last 4 years. I interviewed 400 doctors. You know, I used to like avoid a white coat at all costs. Now I want to like wear one. You know?
Talk about total immersion therapy or exposure therapy.
Yeah, totally. And the amazing thing is like when you start learning and start growing, it is like, you know, bringing a torch into the night sky, right? It reveals how much darkness there is. You know, when you start learning about physiology or microbiology or virology or vaccinology or etiology, you realize how much you don't know. And that can be frustrating sometimes, but it's so alluring and it keeps you growing. Never
a wrong or right answer. I loved and appreciated that interpretation. Jeff, where can my audience go to connect with you and learn more about stress and your work?
Yeah. Well,
get on that amazing email list.
Yeah. Well, I write these commusings every week. So, my platform is called Commune. I have a little imposter syndrome given who else is on there. It's, you know, Zach Bush and Mark Hyman and Marianne Williamson and Deepak Chopra and Sadhguru and Wim Hof and all these people.
Some pretty good company.
But I'm on there too. And I have a couple of courses. I have one on stoicism, and then I have an online course on good stress. So you just go to onecommune.com. That's ONE commune.com.
All right.
And I host a podcast called Commune, where you can hear people 30 times smarter than me. You know, I kind of wax.
Until Chase Tuning comes on. And then it's only...
Hardly. And
then it's only 29.
Right. And I'm sort of waxing alternately, poetically and pathetically on Instagram at Jeff Krasno. So those are the primary locales.
Amazing. Well, that will all be in the show notes and video notes for you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in here today. Definitely check out Jeff's work. It's been great getting to know you and your family and community more the last couple of years now. And I'll see you in a couple hours for dinner.
Sounds great, man.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, dude.